Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel. Am Yitz Hashem. Today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Samach Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and we pick up today on the top line of Kuf Samach Aleph in the words of the Mechaber, in the middle of Siman Shin Chav Hey Sif Yud Aleph, right by the word V'chein on the top line. Our learning today should be as chus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasunu Basaru Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Bein Bayabasha Hamakim Yirachim Aleihem V'Yitziem Yitzaru L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'Ora Mishiva L'Geula Hashtav Agala V'Zman Kariv V'Namar Amein. Our learning should be as chus for Shalema for Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malka Chana Yitzhak Ben Sian Ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Aleich Havadasa Baserel. They should have a Refuah Shalema B'Sar Shar Chel Yisrael. And we ask that the limud Torah of Klal Yisrael should be as chus. The Rabbi Shalom should watch over every single member of Klal Yisrael b'chol makom shehem. So, back in Sif Yud, we learned halacha. We said that if an Eini Yehudi draws water from a bar, now the interior of the bar is Rishus HaYachid. We said that if an Eini Yehudi draws water out of the bar and brings it up to the Rishus HaRabim, he takes it out of the confines of the cistern or the well, and he brings it out to Rishus HaRabim, so that he has performed a malacha daraisa. He's done the malacha of Hitzah. He transferred the bucket of water from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim. If he does it for himself, he did it in order to give water to his own animal. So we said that in that case, the water is mutter to Yisraelim. A Yid could come and use the leftover water, and he could give it to his animals. Over here, we have a case where the Eini Yehudi did a malacha daraisa, but he did it for himself. He didn't do it for Yisrael in any way, shape, or form. So now there's leftover water. If Yisrael wants to make use of it, we said it's no problem. But the Mechaber gave a caveat in Sif Yud. He said this is only true im einoi makiroi, if the Eini Yehudi does not know the Yisrael. If the Eini Yehudi knows the Yisrael, then it's aser. Why? Because if the Eini Yehudi knows the Yisrael, we have to be chayshish that maybe the Eini Yehudi brought up extra water so that the Yisrael should have water for his animal as well, and maybe at least some of the malacha was done for the Yisrael, in which case it would be aser. That's what we learned in Sif Yud. In Sif Yud Aleph, we learned a very, very similar halacha. In Sif Yud Aleph, the Mechaber was talking about an Eini Yehudi who goes and uproots grass. So he does the malacha darais of Toilish. So the Eini Yehudi went and he uproots grass. The Mechaber told us in Sif Yud Aleph, if he did it for his own purposes, if he did it to give the grass to his own animal, so then, again, if there's leftover grass, the Yisrael could go ahead and make use of it. He could feed it to his animals. But the Mechaber said, again, this is only true im einoi makiroi, if the Eini Yehudi does not know the Yisrael. But if the Eini Yehudi knows the Yisrael, then again, it's going to be aser. Why? Because just like by the water, we have to be chayshish that here too. Maybe Tony was very, very nice, and he uprooted extra grass so that there should be leftovers for the Yisrael's behema. So again, what's the chash? We're chayshish shema yarbe bishviloi. Maybe the Eini Yehudi was marbe, he did more malacha for the purposes of the Yisrael, in which case the malacha is being done for a Yid, and if the malacha is being done for a Yid, it's aser to Yisraelim. Now, here on the top of Kuf Samach Aleph, says the Mishnah Berurah, it says the Mechaber, don't think that this only pertains to taking water out of a well or uprooting grass from the ground. Says the Mechaber, V'chein, b'chol davar de'ikal abecha Hashem yarbe b'shviloi. Any time that we have room for this concern, any time that we have to be afraid that the Eini Yehudi was marbe, it looks like he did everything for his own purposes, but maybe he did extra malacha so that there should be for the Yisrael also. We have to have it would be aser. The same way by the mayim and by the grass, anytime the Eini Yehudi did something and there's room for that concern, it would be aser for the Yisrael. Aval, however, but by a type of malacha where there's no way of looking at this and having a concern, oh, maybe the Eini Yehudi was marbeh, maybe he did more malacha for the benefit of the Yisrael. Keep going. For example, shehidlik ner la'atzmai. Say an Eini Yehudi goes and he lights a fire for his own purposes. He wants to sit down and he wants to read, so he goes ahead and he lights a lamp, and now he's sitting down and reading. Now, over there is no concern of Shema Yarbe Bishviloi. You know why? There's no such thing as being marbe with an air. Once you turn on the light is on. What's the concern? Maybe he turned on the light more? There's no turning on the light more. He lit the lamp. Lighting the lamp is lighting the lamp. He lit the lamp for his own purpose. There's no such thing as being marbe for the yid. What do? Light it more? There is no Shema Yarbe Bishviloi. Asa Kevesh Leireid Boy. Or the Eini Yehudi and the Yisrael both live in a building. And the Eini Yehudi decides he needs a wheelchair-accessible ramp. He needs a ramp to get down. So he went and he built himself a ramp. And he's using the ramp all the time. So what's the chash? Maybe when he built the ramp, he was marbe for the yid. There's no such thing as being marbe. Once you build a ramp, there's a ramp. He built the ramp for his own purposes. Maybe he thought that, hey, it'll help the yid too. But that doesn't mean he wasn't marbe for the yid. He didn't do anything extra for the yid. He built the ramp that he needs. Even if he had in mind that the yid will use it also, that's not a problem. He built it for himself. That's what he built it for. It's only a problem when you have a concern that he did something extra for the yid, because then he did malacha for the yid. But by these cases, he didn't do the malacha for the yid. Like the Mechaber says, shebener echad, by lighting one lamp, ubekevish echad, and by building one ramp, yaspik lakoil. That's for everybody. 1,000 people could use one ramp. So in that case, afilu makiroi, even if the Eini Yehudi knows the Yisrael, mutter, because there's no room for a chash of Shema Yarbe bishviloi. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton samiches, mutter. We have to remember that when we say that there's an isser, when a goy does malacha for a yid, when we say that the product of that malacha is usher, we really had two reasons to say it was usher. One reason was that you can't have benefit from the malacha that the Eini Yehudi did for you. Now, what we just said over here in Sif Yud Aleph takes care of that concern, right? Since ner le'echad is ner le'meah, since lighting one ner is good enough for everybody, so we don't have to have concern that you're getting hana from malacha that the goy did for you. No, he did it for himself, and there's no room for Shema Yarbe b'shviloi. But we spoke about a second concern. The second concern was, we don't want you using the product of the goy's malacha, because then maybe on another Shabbos you'll directly ask him to do malacha for you. So how about that concern? Says the Mishnah Berurah, even those opinions who say that that's a valid concern, what are you afraid of? You're going to say, if the guy lit a ner for his own purposes, we shouldn't let the yid do it, because maybe next week the yid will ask the guy to light a ner. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that we're not concerned about, because the dafka b'davar sheyasa la'atzmai chayshinan shema yarbe b'shvil Yisrael. We're only concerned about the Eini Yehudi doing malacha for the Yisrael when the Eini Yehudi is doing the malacha for himself anyway. So when the Eini Yehudi is going to draw water for his behemoths, then we're worried that maybe he'll be marbeh and he'll draw more water for the Yisrael. But we're not afraid that next week the Eini Yehudi is going to do something only for the Yid. And again, what are you afraid of? If he's lighting the ner for himself, then it's good for the Yisrael also. The only room for concern would be if the Eini Yehudi doesn't want the ner at all, and he's only doing it for the Yisrael. That we're not choshish for. Moving along to Sif Yud Beis, 3 lines down, says the Mechaber. Afal pi she'enoi makiroi. Let's say Tony does not know the Yisrael. Tony does not know Ruvain at all. Now, in that case, we said, okay, Tony goes ahead and draws water from the well, and he did it for his own animals and his leftovers. Go ahead. Ruvain could go ahead and use the extra water because Tony did it for himself. Caveat, if Tony knows Ruvain, then it's usher because we have to be choshish sheba yarbe b'shviloi. Says the Mechaber, Afa Pisha Einoi Makiroi. Even if we're dealing with a case where Tony does not know Ruvain, so there is no Chash Shem Yarbe B'Shviloi. Im Oimer Beferish Shel Tzarech Yisrael Oisa. If when Tony is drawing the water out of the well, he looks at the Yisrael and he says, I'm going to draw some extra water for you. Or even if Tony doesn't spell it out, he doesn't say Beferish, I'm going to draw extra water for you. Im Maisav Moichichim Shel Tzarech Yisrael Oisa. If the facts on the ground prove and show that the fact is that the guy did do extra malacha for the Yisrael, Kigoin, for example, Shehidlik ner bebayish Yisrael boy. Let's say a guy comes into a Yid's house and he sees that the Yid is sitting in the dark. So he goes ahead and he lights an air. Yehudi, and then he leaves. So Tony is, an Amazon delivery guy. He knocks on the door, he opens the door, he sees that you're sitting in the dark, so he goes ahead and he lights a lamp for you, and then he turns around and he leaves. Also, this is a case where a guy did malacha daraisa, he lit an air. I'm not talking about turning on a light. Turning on a light is probably an issa d'Rabbanan. If it's an old-fashioned filament bulb, then it's a daraisa. But if it's an LED, it's pashtus, it's an issa d'Rabbanan. But I'm talking about the days of the Mechaber. Somebody comes in and he lights a lamp. That's the issa d'Oraisa of Havara, of making a fire. So if the guy comes in, he sees that the Yid is sitting in the dark, he lights a fire, and then he turns around and he leaves the house. So clearly he did it for the Yisrael, right? So we have an Ein Yehudi, did Malacha d'Oraisa for Yisrael. The Yisrael's not allowed to have Anah from that issa d'Oraisa. Now, in that case, did the guy say, I'm going to light a lamp for you? No, he didn't spell it out, beferish. Does the Amazon delivery guy know you? He doesn't know you. So it's Einoi Makiroi, and he didn't say beferish that he's doing it for you, but Maisav Mechichim. The facts on the ground show very clearly that he did it for the Yisrael. Why? Because he lit it left. So clearly he did it for the Yisrael. In that case, says the Mechaber, it's also for a Yid to get Hana from that malacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kod Sabach Tesim, Oimer beferish, Ritzaino Loimar. When the Mechaber says that in this case it's aser, it's aser even if the guy uses it a little bit first. In Sivav we saw that if the Ein Yehudi does malacha for the Yisrael, that malacha is going to be aser. Like the Mishnah Berurah said over there. Anytime a guy does malacha daraisa on behalf of a Yid, no Yid is allowed to get hana from that malacha. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, if the guy says, I'm going to light this lamp for you, then even if he reads by the lamp for 5 minutes, it's still aser. Because the bottom line is, he said he did it for you. Ice cut and ayin, we had the case where the facts on the ground proved that the guy did it for the Yisrael. What was that case? He came in, he lit the lamp, and he left. V'holach. V'loy nishtamish by ma'uma. He never used it. He came into your house, he lit the lamp, he turned around, and he left. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, the phraseology of the Mechaber is very interesting. The phraseology of the Mechaber is, what's the case where Maisav Moichichim, where the act of the Ein Yehudi proves that he did the malacha for the Yisrael, when he lit the ner, and then he left. So the Mishnah Berurah is very medayik in that lashon. Mishnah Berurah says, Mashma, Dem loy haya Ein Yehudi haylech. Let's say he didn't leave. Let's say he lit the lamp, and he didn't leave. He stuck around for a while. Haya mutar Yisrael lehistamish tekif b'shehidlik aner, af kaidim shehem ishtamish by Ein Yehudi. If the guy lit the lamp, and then he stuck around, even if he's not reading by the light of that lamp, but he's hanging around, he's staying there. So now, is it Maisav Moichichim that he lit it for the Yisrael? If he lights it and he turns around and he leaves, then it's Taka Maisav Moichichim that he lit it for the Yisrael. But if he lights it and he sticks around for a while, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes from now he's going to pick up the newspaper and he's going to start reading. He's still here. When somebody lights a lamp in a house, and he sticks around, it's very useful to have light in the house. So maybe the guy is going to use it. If he's still here, then it's very reasonable to say, why did he light the lamp? Well, he lit the lamp. He's sticking around. It must be he knew he was going to need light. So he lit a lamp. So then it's no longer Ma'asav Mechichim that he did it for the Yisrael. Where this is delved into in a little greater detail. Sif Yud Gimel says to Mechaber. Imlikate, this is a very interesting case. This is like an in-between case. We had one case in Sif Yod Aleph where the Mechaber said, Likate Eini Yehudi Asavim L'tzarech Behemtoi. An Eini Yehudi went, he plucked grass, so he did the Malacha Daraisa of Toilish, and he's feeding it to his animal. So okay, so he did a Malacha Daraisa, but he did it for himself. He did it for his animals, to feed his animals. Okay, there's leftovers, the Yisrael could go ahead and use those leftovers. He could take them and he could feed them to his animals. But the Mechaber in Sif Yud Aleph said, if the goy is makiroi, if the Eini Yehudi knows the Yisrael, then you can't use the grass. Why not? Because then you have to be choishish that he plucked extra grass for the Yisrael. Certainly, if the goy says, hey, I'm plucking grass, I'll pluck for you too, then it's certainly usher to use, right? Because he did malacha for the Yisrael. What's the case where it's mutter? Where you have no indication at all that he did it for the Yisrael. He doesn't know the Yisrael. He picked it. He was feeding it to his animals, just as extras. In that case, it's mutter. Now says the Mechaber, how about this case? Im liket Eini Yehudi, an Eini Yehudi went and plucked grass, v'hechel lebehemas Yisrael. He picked grass and he's feeding it to the Yid's behema. He's not feeding it to his own behema. He's feeding it to the Yid's behema. Now, I mean, that would very simply look like a case where Ma'asav Moichichim, that he did it for the Yisrael. I mean, he's literally plucking the grass and feeding it to Ruvain's cow. Isn't that Ma'asav Moichichim, that he's giving it, that he's doing it for the Yisrael? Doesn't this look like Malacha Daraisa that the guy is doing for the Yisrael? In that case, that Malacha should be Aser. You would think that maybe the Yid has to jump up and say, no, don't feed that grass to my cow. I can't have hana from your malacha that you're doing for me. Says the Mechaber, no. Im likei Eini Yehudi v'hechel behemoth Yisrael, if the Eini Yehudi went and plucked grass and he's feeding it to the Yid's behema, ein tzarech limchais biyadai, the Yisrael does not have to object lefisha, as long as this is happening like temporarily. It's a once in a while occurrence. It's a once in a blue moon occurrence. You don't have to object. Avalim rogel bekach, but if this is something that's happening every Shabbos, if every Shabbos Tony is plucking grass and feeding it to your animal, tzarech limchais, then you have to go ahead and you have to object. So the first halacha here in Sif Yud Gimel is the fascinating halacha. Over here, it certainly would seem to be Ma'asav Mechichim that the Eini Yehudi is doing malacha for the Yisrael. He's literally plucking the grass and feeding the Yisrael's cow. And yet, the Mechaber says, the Yisrael is not mechuyev to object. Why not? Well, says the Mishnah Berurah cut in Ayin Aleph. Ein sarach limchais. What does that mean? Ein sarach limchais biyadai, says the Chavetz Chaim. He doesn't have to object, mila laket. He doesn't have to stop the guy from plucking the grass. Ula hachil behemtoi. And he doesn't have to object to him feeding his animal. Why not? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kevan she'ena oisezeh betzivu Yisrael. He's not doing this because the Yid asked him to. The Yid didn't ask him to do this. He certainly wasn't mitzvah him. He certainly didn't command him to do it. Elameyatzmai. He's doing it on his own. Ruvain didn't say a word to Tony. Tony is going ahead and doing this completely on his own volition. V'amrinan, therefore we say, Delav lahanos Yisrael mechavein. You think he's doing it because he wants to do Ruvain a favor? Halacha esav saynei es Yaakov. He's not doing it to do Ruvain a favor. So why is he doing it? Ela adaita denavshei oisa. He's doing it on his own. Kedei laharviach. He's doing it on his own because Motzei Shabbos he expects to go to Ruvain and give him a bill, or at least he expects to get a good tip. He expects that Ruvain is going to have a karas hatoiv to me. It's Shabbos. Ruvain can't pluck grass and feed it to his animal. He sees that I'm doing it for him. Mistama, he'll slip me a 20 at some point, or he'll give me a nice bottle. So he's doing it for himself. He's not doing it for the Yisrael. And therefore you don't have to stop him, because you can make this cheshbon. You could say, no, this is not malacha that a guy is doing for a Yisrael. He's doing it for his own purposes. He's doing it because he expects a good tip. And, says the Mishnah Berurah, we have a precedent for this in Shin Lamadal and Sivchav Hey. We should learn it together, Bez Hashem Yisbarach in good health. Le'inyan Daleka, when it comes to the question of a fire that broke out, somebody's house, Chas v'Chalila, is burning down, and a guy comes of his own volition, and he's putting the fire out. Well, he's doing kibui, that's Malacha Daraisa. He's doing it on behalf of the Yisrael. He's putting out the Yisrael's house. Is the Yisrael mechuyev to object? No. Why? Because we could say he's doing it for his own purposes. What do you mean he's doing it for his own purposes? Well, he's a fireman and he gets a paycheck. Or even if he's not a fireman, he figures I'm going to have a karas atoiv to him. If the shtabas b'stam, I'll give him a nice present or I'll pay him. So he's doing it for himself. He's not doing it for the Yid. Now, there's a problem with this. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to address that problem right now, but the wording of the Mishnah Berurah is a little bit interesting. What's the problem with this? The problem with this essentially is Sif Yod Aleph. What did we just say over here? What we just said over here is the Ein Yehudi is plucking grass, Malacha Daraisa, Toilish. He's feeding it to a Yid's animal. On the surface, it definitely looks like he's doing the Malacha for the Yisrael. Yet we have a huge chiddush. You don't have to stop him. Why? Because we can make this cheshbon, and we could say, oh, he's not really doing it for the Yisrael. He's doing it for himself because he hopes to get a good tip. Okay, let's now extend that reasoning, let's say, to Sif Yod Aleph. Ein Yehudi is plucking grass, and he's feeding it to his animal. Now, the Ein Yehudi is Tony. Tony is plucking grass. He's feeding it to his own animal. We said, if Tony does not know the Yisrael standing next door, if Reuven is standing there but Tony doesn't know him, then when Tony finishes feeding his animal, Reuven could go use the extra and he could feed his own animal. Why? Because Tony did the malacha for himself. But what if Tony knows Reuven? If Tony knows Reuven, then Reuven can't use the grass. Why? Because we have to be chayshish. Shema yarbe b'shviloi. Maybe he plucked more grass for Reuven's benefit. Well, wait a second. Let's say Tony did pluck extra grass for Reuven's benefit. Why don't we say, oh, he didn't really do it for Reuven. He did it because he hopes that he's going to get a nice box of chocolates from Reuven next week. Or he hopes Reuven's going to slip him a 20. Or he hopes Reuven's going to give him a nice bottle. Why don't we make the same cheshbon that we're making here? Here we're making a cheshbon, and we're saying that even though Tony is mamish plucking the grass and feeding it to the Yisrael's cow, so it's very clear that he's doing it for the Yisrael. No, we say he's not doing it for the Yisrael. He's doing it for his own purposes. But in Yod Aleph, where he's not even feeding it to Reuven's cow, right? The problem is just that he knows Reuven. Oy vey, he knows Reuven. We have to be chayshish shema yarbe b'shviloi. And if he was marbe b'shviloi, it's aser. Why? Why don't we just say, nah, he didn't really do it for Reuven. He did it for himself. What's the difference between these two sifim? Explains the Mishnah Berurah an interesting svara. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there's a very big difference between these two cases. In Sif Yod Aleph, the question is, could Reuven pick up the extra grass, and could Reuven feed the extra grass to his animal? And the answer over there is no. As long as Tony knows him, we have to be chayshish shema yarbe b'shviloi, and therefore, Reuven cannot physically pick up that animal, that food, that grass, and feed it to his animal. Why? Because that would constitute Reuven getting hana from Tony's malacha daraisa. Reuven's getting hana because he's using the grass. He's picking up the grass, and he's feeding it to the animal. That's Yod Aleph. Over here in Yud Gimel, we're not talking about Reuven picking up the grass and feeding it to his animal. Over here, we're talking about Tony is taking the grass and feeding it to Reuven's animal. What are we saying Reuven's allowed to do? Reuven's allowed to sit back with his hands folded. He doesn't have to object. Why? Because even though it could very well be that Tony did the malacha for Reuven, right? We have an out. We have a loophole. We can make an argument, he's not really doing it for Reuven. He's really doing it for himself. That argument is enough to be matir Reuven to sit with folded hands and not object. It's not enough to allow Reuven to actually pick up the grass and actually use the grass to feed his animal. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say here. Let's see it inside. The Mishnah Berurah says, Masha Ein Kain Mesif Yod Aleph, Sheha Yisrael Ba'atzmai Machil. In Sif Yod Aleph, we were looking to be matir to allow the Yisrael to actually pick up the grass and feed his animal. Osir, that would be Osir if Tony knows him, or if the guy said straight out that he's doing it for the Yisrael, Kevin Shenena B'Yodayim. Because over there, we're looking to be matir the Yisrael to be Nena B'Yodayim, to actually use the grass. And also, if it would certainly be usher if the Yid asks the guy to go do it, even though he started doing it for his own purposes. But if you ask him to do it, you certainly can't go ahead and be nene from that malacha. Now, the Mechaber said here in Sif Yud Gimel, you don't have to object if this is happening lefi shah, if it's something that happens once in a while. Avalim rugil, but if this is habitual, if this is happening every Shabbos, that Tony's uprooting grass and feeding your animal, then you got to stop him. Why? Duhurak ha'arama ba'alma va'aser. Because now this is just ha'arama. Now this is just a trickery. Now this is just wink wink. Right? I mean, this is going on every week. If it's going on every week, clearly Tony's doing malacha for you, to benefit you. In that case, you got to stop him. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sif Yud Dalid. Thank you so much for joining me for Leaving HaTorah. This list of Leaving HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua Sefurus Parnas and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS Tzedek B'mher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.